Before we get started, make sure to subscribe to the channel and like this video. That way, you'll always stay connected to our stories and never miss the next adventure. The Galactic Naval Academy hung in the void like a promise, or maybe a threat, depending on who you asked. Spanning 15 cubic kilometers of reinforced uranium and quantum-shielded corridors, it was the kind of place that made you feel simultaneously insignificant and incredibly important. Which, if you think about it, is exactly how military institutions prefer their recruits to feel. Inside Training Deck 9, and yes, there were 42 training decks, because apparently the galaxy loved bureaucracy as much as it loved warfare. Roughly 300 cadets from 60 different species stood in formation. Well, stood was generous. Some hovered, others coiled. A few existed in states of matter that didn't have a proper verb yet. Commander Nixavold paced before them, his centaurian frame moving with the fluid grace of someone who'd spent 2 centuries perfecting the art of looking intimidating. He had 3 eyes arranged in a triangle formation on his elongated head, and right now all 3 were narrowed in what could only be described as preemptive disappointment. "The Infinity Nexus," he announced, gesturing toward the massive archway behind him that led into the simulation chamber, "has operated flawlessly for 300 cycles. Through the Balerian Uprising, through the Great Singularity War, through the incident we don't talk about involving the Glorbian ambassador and the anti-gravity generator." He paused, letting that sink in. "It has never, and I want you all to understand this word, never crashed." In the back row, Dante Reyes tried very hard not to look conspicuous, which is universally recognized as the best way to become immediately conspicuous. He was human, which already made him stick out like a supernova in a dim nebula. Humans had only been invited to the Academy 5 cycles ago, after finally convincing the Galactic Council that yes, they had stopped nuking themselves, and yes, they could probably be trusted with faster-than-light travel. Probably. Dante stood at roughly 1.8 meters, with dark hair that perpetually looked like he'd just rolled out of bed, and brown eyes that held a dangerous combination of intelligence and the distinct lack of self-preservation that characterized his entire species. He wore the standard-issue cadet uniform, which on humans looked vaguely like someone had wrapped them in metallic compression wear. On Balerians, it looked dignified. On humans, it looked like they were about to go speed skating. To his left, Syndra, a Balerian with 4 arms and confidence that could power a small moon, glanced at him with 2 of her 6 eyes. "Try not to embarrass your species today, mammal," she said, her voice carrying the musical quality of her people mixed with the sharp edge of someone who'd graduated top of her class in basic combat and wasn't about to let anyone forget it. "I'll do my best," Dante replied, which was human for no promises. To his right, Brock adjusted his carapace with a clicking sound. The Crustian looked like someone had taken a lobster, made it 2 meters tall, given it the ability to do calculus, and then put it in military school. "The probability of successful scenario completion is 98.3% for standard tactical approaches," he murmured, mostly to himself. "Deviation from protocol reduces success probability exponentially." "That's comforting," Dante said. "It wasn't meant to be comforting. It was meant to be accurate." Behind them, Lumi, the Stellarian, pulsed with a soft bioluminescence that indicated nervousness. Stellarians were essentially jellyfish that had evolved sentience, developed technology, and decided space exploration beat swimming around on their home world. She didn't speak often, but when she did, people listened. Mostly because her species communicated through modulated light patterns that the translation matrix converted to speech, and it had an unsettling habit of making everything sound prophetic. "The new one goes today," she pulsed softly. "The patterns feel irregular." "The patterns are fine," Sindra said dismissively. "It's just a simulation. What's the worst that could happen?" Now, if you've ever heard anyone in any story, in any language, across any civilization say, "What's the worst that could happen?" you know immediately that the answer is something worse than they're currently imagining. Commander Nixavol continued his lecture, which was really more of a sermon. The Infinity Nexus operates on quantum neural architecture that predates most of your civilizations. It reads your neural patterns, constructs a perfect tactical scenario, and adapts in real time to your decisions. It is, he paused for dramatic effect, unhackable, unbreakable, and infallible. From somewhere in the middle of the formation, someone coughed. It might have been skepticism. It might have been actual illness. With 60 species in one room, you could never be sure. "Today," Nixavol announced, "we complete the rotation. All species have run their scenarios. Valerians," he nodded at Sindra, who stood straighter, "exemplary tactical formation. Crustians," Brock's antennae perked up, "mathematically perfect resource management. Stellarians," Lumi glowed brighter, "innovative energy redistribution." Dante felt his stomach do something unpleasant. He was pretty sure he knew what came next. And finally, Nixavol's middle eye fixed directly on him, "humans." The way he said "humans" made it sound like he was identifying a particularly stubborn stain. Sindra made a sound that might have been a laugh. "This should be entertaining." "Define entertaining," Brock clicked. "Watching a species that still uses fossil fuels try to command a quantum-linked battle fleet." "We stopped using fossil fuels 15 years ago," Dante interjected. 15 cycles is 5 seconds in galactic terms, mammal." Nixavol raised one of his 3 hands. "Cadet Dante. Front and center." Dante walked forward, very aware that 300 beings from 60 species were watching him. Some with multiple eyes. Some with sensory organs he couldn't even identify. All with the same expression. This is either going to be boring or catastrophic, and either way, it's better than tactical theory class. The commander looked down at him, down because Centaurians were tall, and his 3 eyes narrowed further, which Dante hadn't thought was geometrically possible. "Do you understand the parameters of the simulation?" "Yes, Commander." "Do you understand that this simulation has been used to train the greatest military minds in galactic history?" "Yes, Commander." "Do you understand that your performance here will be recorded, analyzed, and potentially used to determine whether your species continues to receive Academy invitations?" That seems like a lot of pressure to put on one guy, but yes, Commander. Nixavol's jaw, or the closest thing Centaurians had to a jaw, tightened. "The scenario is standard. You will command a frigate-class vessel defending a mining colony from pirate raiders. Resource management, tactical positioning, and strategic adaptation will all be evaluated. Do you have any questions?" Dante thought about it. "Just one. When you say standard, do you mean standard for the galaxy or standard for—" "Enter the chamber, Cadet." "Right. Stupid question." The simulation chamber was enormous, easily 50 meters in diameter, with a domed ceiling that flickered with ambient energy. In the center stood a neural link chair that looked simultaneously ancient and impossibly advanced. The kind of chair that made you wonder if sitting in it was the smartest decision you'd ever make, or the last decision you'd ever make. Dante approached it while Commander Nixavol took his position at the observation deck, where a holographic display would show everyone outside exactly what was happening inside Dante's scenario, which meant if he screwed up, it would be in high definition and 3 dimensions. "Neural link establishing," announced a synthetic voice that sounded like it had been designed to be calming but landed somewhere around vaguely ominous. Dante sat down. The chair adjusted to his physiology, which took a moment because apparently human spines were weird by galactic standards, and then metallic tendrils extended from the headrest, making contact with his temples. The sensation was difficult to describe. Imagine someone downloading the internet directly into your brain, except the internet is an entire simulated universe, and your brain is trying very hard not to panic. Neural link established. Initiating scenario in 3, 2, 1. The training deck vanished. Reality shifted, and Dante found himself standing on the bridge of a frigate-class vessel, which was apparently called the Defiant Hope, because even in simulations, someone had a sense of irony. The bridge was functional, efficient, and staffed by AI crew members that looked vaguely humanoid, but with that uncanny quality that said, "I'm advanced programming pretending to have a soul." "Captain," one of them said, the tactical officer, based on the console, "we're receiving distress signals from the mining colony on Beacon 4. Multiple pirate vessels inbound. Estimated arrival, 6 minutes." Dante took a breath. Okay. Standard scenario. He'd studied this. Everyone had studied this. There were 3 accepted tactical approaches, each with predictable outcomes. Pick one, execute properly. Scenario complete. He looked at the holographic display showing the system layout. The mining colony, the asteroid field, his frigate, and 8 incoming pirate vessels. "Shields up," he ordered. "Charge weapons. Plot an intercept course." The crew moved with mechanical efficiency. Outside the simulation, Commander Nixivol watched the tactical display and nodded slightly. Standard opening. Predictable. Safe. Dante's frigate moved into position, placing itself between the colony and the pirates. Classic defensive posture. Any minute now, he'd either engage in direct combat, use the asteroid field for tactical advantage, or attempt to outmaneuver the superior numbers. Any minute now. The pirates entered weapons range. Dante opened a communication channel. "Attention pirate vessels. This is Captain Dante Reyes of the Defiant Hope. I'd like to negotiate." On the observation deck, Syndra blinked 4 of her 6 eyes. Did he just try to negotiate? "That's not standard protocol," Brock noted. Commander Nixvol frowned. "It's within parameters. Unconventional, but permitted." The pirate leader appeared on the view screen, a Glorbian with the standard issue scarred face and attitude problem. "You want to negotiate? Here's my offer. Surrender, and we'll only take your ship and your crew. Resist, and we take everything, including your remains." Dante smiled. "Counter offer. You tell me which of you is the fleet leader, and I'll give you 10 seconds to run before I start shooting." The Glorbian laughed. "Bold. Stupid, but bold. You're outnumbered 8-1. "Yeah, I noticed. Here's the thing, though." Dante leaned forward. "I don't actually need to beat all of you. I just need to make it expensive enough that it's not worth it." There was a pause. "Tactical," Dante said quietly, not breaking eye contact with the screen. "Target their lead ship. Full weapons." "Aye, Captain." "And here's where it gets interesting," Dante continued. "You see, I know how pirate fleets work. You're all independent contractors, right? Working together until the profit margin gets too thin. So here's my question. If I cripple your flagship, do the rest of you stick around to avenge him? Or do you calculate that one frigate with military-grade shields isn't worth the repair costs? The Glorbian's expression shifted slightly. On the observation deck, Lumi pulsed. Interesting approach, Sindra scoffed. It won't work. Pirates in the simulation follow aggressive behavioral protocols. Probability of success through intimidation, 12.6%, Brock calculated. But Commander Nixivol was watching the tactical display very carefully. Because something strange was happening. The pirate fleet was hesitating. In the simulation, Dante fired on the lead ship, not to destroy it, but targeting just the engines. Precise, surgical. The kind of shot that said, "I'm good enough to choose what breaks." The lead ship spun, disabled but intact. "Anyone else?" Dante asked calmly. Two of the pirate ships broke formation and jumped to faster-than-light travel. The remaining 6 shared what appeared to be a brief communication. Then 3 more jumped away. The last 3 decided to attack. "Well," Dante sighed, "I tried diplomacy." What happened next would later be described by military analysts as technically proficient, but disturbingly creative. Dante didn't engage in a straight firefight. Instead, he maneuvered his frigate toward the asteroid field, firing not at the pirates, but at the asteroids themselves, creating a debris field that limited their attack vectors. "Divert auxiliary power to forward shields," he ordered, "and cut engines to minimum." "Captain," the AI tactical officer said with programmed concern, "that will make us a stationary target." Exactly. The 3 pirate ships, sensing weakness, moved in for the kill. Dante waited, and waited. And just as they entered optimal firing range, bunched together because the debris field limited their positioning, Dante rerouted all shield power to weapons, fired 3 simultaneous bursts, and then immediately jumped his ship 0.2 light-years away. The pirates, having fired at where the Defiant Hope had been, mostly hit each other. When Dante's ship reappeared, all 3 pirate vessels were damaged, confused, and suddenly very interested in being literally anywhere else. They jumped away. The mining colony was safe. Mission complete. On the observation deck, there was silence. "That was..." Sindra started. "Irregular," Brock finished. "Effective," Lumi pulsed. Commander Nixivol stared at the tactical display. The scenario had been completed successfully. Unconventionally, yes. Completely outside standard doctrine, absolutely. But successfully. He reached for the control panel to terminate the simulation. That's when the first error message appeared. "Warning, tactical algorithm contradiction detected." Nixivol frowned. That wasn't normal. Inside the simulation, Dante was preparing to disengage when his AI crew chief approached. "Captain, we're receiving another distress signal. Different sector. It's..." The image flickered. The bridge of the Defiant Hope stuttered, like a video feed with bad connection. "Warning, scenario parameters undefined." "What in the void?" Nixivol muttered. The simulation was improvising. It wasn't supposed to do that. It was supposed to run a predefined scenario, evaluate the cadets' performance, and terminate. But Dante's approach had been so far outside predicted behavioral parameters that the simulation's adaptive AI was trying to generate new challenges on the fly. And something about that process was making the quantum neural architecture very, very unhappy. Inside the simulation, Dante looked around his bridge as the lights flickered. Is it just me, or is reality getting a bit glitchy? The tactical officer, still operating normally, pulled up a new sensor reading. "Captain, we're detecting anomalous readings from the..." The sentence never finished. Because that's when everything went sideways. The simulation didn't crash yet. Not quite. but it was about to. And everyone watching was about to find out exactly what happens when you let a human near technology that was explicitly designed to be foolproof. Spoiler alert, humans are very, very good at finding the fool. The anomalous readings turned out to be another fleet, except this fleet wasn't pirates. It wasn't the mining colony. It wasn't anything that should have been in a standard defensive scenario. It was the simulation itself, trying to adapt and failing spectacularly. "Captain," the tactical officer said, his voice glitching between syllables. "I'm reading 12. No, 30. No." The number kept climbing. "Error. Cannot determine enemy count." Dante stared at the holographic display. Ships were appearing and disappearing, phasing in and out of existence like someone was playing with a cosmic light switch. Some looked like pirate vessels. Others looked like military frigates. One briefly looked like a spacefaring whale before vanishing entirely. "Okay," Dante said slowly. "That's new." On the observation deck, Commander Nixvol was no longer frowning. He was doing something between frowning and panicking, which, on a Centaurian, looked like all three eyes were trying to look in different directions simultaneously. "Abort simulation," he commanded. "Error. Abort sequence interrupted." "What do you mean, interrupted?" Nixvol demanded. "Override authorization, Nixvol Delta 913. Error. Authorization not recognized." Sindra stood up from her observation seat. "Commander, that's not possible. The simulation has failsafes built into failsafes." "Yes," Nixvol said tightly. "It's supposed to." Brock was already at a diagnostic terminal, his multiple limbs moving across controls. The quantum neural matrix is stuck in a recursive adaptation loop. The cadet's tactical approach deviated so far from predicted parameters that the AI is trying to generate appropriate challenges. But each generation contradicts previous scenario logic. "In language that doesn't require 6 brains to understand?" Sindra demanded. "It's confused," Lumi pulsed. "The simulation is confused." Inside the chamber, Dante was coming to a similar conclusion. The bridge around him kept shifting. The walls flickered between different hull configurations. His crew's faces changed species every few seconds. One console briefly turned into a potted plant. "This is either the weirdest tactical scenario ever," Dante muttered, "or something's gone very, very wrong." The communication channel crackled to life, except instead of a pirate leader or a distress signal, it was just noise, static that almost sounded like words. Numbers that might have been coordinates, a voice that kept saying "protocol deviation" over and over. Dante made a command decision. "Helm, take us out of the system. Maximum speed." "Unable to comply, Captain. Navigation systems are... The helmsman's voice became a loop. "Right," Dante said. "So we're trapped in a broken simulation. That's just fantastic." He stood up from the command chair and walked to the main console. If the simulation was glitching, maybe he could use that. The thought was barely half-formed, but Dante had learned a long time ago that sometimes the best solution was the stupid one. He started pressing buttons, not the tactical controls, not the navigation, just random inputs, communication frequencies, diagnostic routines, the button that probably made coffee if this ship had coffee, which it might or might not depending on which reality flicker was currently active. On the observation deck, alarms started blaring. "What's he doing?" Sindra demanded. "He's making it worse," Brock calculated unnecessarily. Nixvol was shouting into a communication panel. "Get me Chief Engineer Mix, now!" Inside the simulation, Dante had opened what appeared to be the ship's maintenance protocols. "Okay, so if this is all AI-generated, then there has to be some kind of underlying logic structure. And if that structure is breaking down, he started typing commands into the console. Then maybe I can break it faster. It was, objectively, terrible logic. It was also uniquely human logic. The simulation flickered harder. The bridge of the Defiant Hope began cycling through different configurations rapidly. Military vessel, civilian transport, pirate raider, something that looked like it belonged underwater, a bus, briefly, a chicken. Yeah, that's definitely broken, Dante confirmed. He kept typing. He accessed the weapons system and tried to fire them, but instead of shooting, they played music. He accessed life support, and it changed the gravity. He accessed the ship's logs, and they became a recipe for something called Glorbian stew. Every input created another contradiction. Every contradiction made the simulation's AI more desperate to adapt. And every adaptation made things worse. On the observation deck, Chief Engineer Mix arrived, all 6 eyes wide. What in the name of the Founders is happening? The human, Nixavold said, and those 2 words carried the weight of exhausted explanation. Mix rushed to the control panel, their multiple appendages flying across the interface. The quantum matrices are cascading. The neural architecture is fragmenting. This shouldn't be possible. And yet, Sindra said dryly, watching through the observation window as Dante's simulation bridge briefly turned into a garden. Mix worked frantically. I'm trying to isolate the corruption, but it's spreading through the entire network. If this reaches the core processors, inside the simulation, Dante had one more idea. A really, truly, magnificently stupid idea. He opened a communication channel to the glitching enemy fleet that may or may not exist. Attention unidentified vessels. I am formally surrendering. His AI crew looked at him in confused silence. Captain, the tactical officer managed, we cannot surrender to entities that don't... I know, Dante said. That's the point. He pressed the surrender command. The simulation tried to process a surrender to non-existent enemies in a scenario that had already been completed, using tactical approaches that violated its core assumptions about rational behavior. The Infinity Nexus, after 300 cycles of flawless operation, made a sound that no computer should ever make. It was almost like a sigh. And then every light in Training Deck 9 went dark. The neural link severed. Dante was ejected from the chair, gasping, disoriented, and extremely confused. Emergency lighting kicked in, bathing everything in red. And in that crimson glow, Commander Nixavold stood perfectly still, all 3 eyes fixed on Dante with an expression that transcended fury into something approaching religious horror. Cadet, he said, very quietly, very slowly, what did you do? Dante, still catching his breath, looked around at the dead simulation chamber, the emergency lights, the shocked faces of 300 cadets from 60 species. He managed a weak smile. I won? Somewhere in the back of the observation deck, Brock was doing calculations. The probability of this happening, he clicked, was 0.0001%. Apparently, not zero enough, Sindra muttered. And Lumi, pulsing with light that seemed almost like laughter, had only one thing to say. Humans. The silence that followed Dante's answer lasted approximately 3 seconds, which in galactic terms is the exact amount of time it takes for stunned disbelief to transform into volcanic fury. Commander Nixavold's 3 eyes didn't blink. They didn't need to. They were too busy boring holes into Dante's soul, assuming humans had souls, which at this particular moment Nixavold was beginning to doubt. You won? The commander's voice was so quiet, it was almost a whisper. which somehow made it infinitely more terrifying than shouting. "You think you won?" Dante, still sitting on the floor where the neural chair had ejected him, had the distinct impression that this was a trick question. "I mean, the colony was safe. The pirates were gone. Mission parameters were... The simulation doesn't exist anymore." Nixavol's voice finally broke its whisper barrier and achieved what could only be described as a controlled roar. 300 cycles! 300 cycles of perfect operation. Survived wars, singularities, and the incident with the Glorbian ambassador. And you, he pointed one long finger at Dante, you crashed it in 11 minutes. Technically, Brock interjected from his diagnostic terminal, it was 10 minutes and 41 seconds. Not helping, Brock. The Crustian's antennae drooped. Accuracy is important. Throughout the training deck, cadets were murmuring in dozens of languages, creating a symphony of confusion and second-hand embarrassment. Some were checking their datapads, as if confirming that yes, this was really happening. Others were simply staring at Dante with expressions ranging from horror to fascination to what might have been respect, though it was hard to tell with species that had facial structures made of crystalline matrices. Syndra crossed two of her forearms. "I told you it would be entertaining." "You said entertaining," another Balerian cadet replied. "This is catastrophic." "I'm Balerian. Same thing." The emergency lighting continued its red pulse, giving the entire scene a distinctly apocalyptic atmosphere, which really didn't help matters. Dante tried to stand up, wobbled slightly. Neural disconnect always left you feeling like your brain had been borrowed by someone else and returned slightly used, and managed to get to his feet. "Commander, I didn't mean to..." "Didn't mean to?" Nixavol took 3 steps forward, which brought him towering over Dante in a way that was probably against several intimidation protocols. "Cadet, I need you to explain something to me. I need you to walk me through your thought process, because right now, I'm trying to understand how someone passes the academy entrance exams, completes basic training, and still thinks that randomly pressing buttons in a simulation is an acceptable tactical approach." "To be fair," Dante said, which was human for, "I'm about to make this worse." The simulation was already glitching when I started pressing buttons. I was trying to... Trying to what? Debug it? You're a tactical cadet, not an engineer. "Actually," came a new voice, exhausted and multi-layered, "he kind of did debug it." Everyone turned to look at Chief Engineer Mix, who was still at the main control panel, surrounded by holographic diagnostic displays that looked like someone had thrown alphabet soup at a quantum computer. Nixavol's middle eye twitched. "Explain." Mix manipulated the holographic interface with 4 of their appendages, while the other 2 held what appeared to be very strong coffee, or whatever Multarians drank when having a really bad day. The Infinity Nexus operates on predictive behavioral algorithms. It generates scenarios based on decision tree analysis. Every species we've tested has tactical approaches that fall within calculable parameters. I'm aware of how the simulation works, Chief Engineer. Right. Well, Mix pulled up a visualization that looked like a 3-dimensional web of light. Here's a standard decision tree, Balerian tactics. The web was complex but organized, branches flowing in logical patterns. Crustian tactics. Another web, even more organized, mathematical in its precision. Stellarian tactics. This one was more fluid, but still followed recognizable patterns. Mix paused, then pulled up another visualization. It looked like someone had detonated a bomb inside a spaghetti factory. Human tactics, Mix said flatly. The web of light was chaos. Branches went in impossible directions. decision nodes connected to completely unrelated outcomes. One path seemed to loop back on itself while simultaneously branching into 17 contradictory options. "That's," Sindra started. "Horrifying?" suggested another cadet. I was going to say incomprehensible, but horrifying works. Brock was studying the display with his compound eyes. "That pattern doesn't follow any known logical framework. There's no optimization path, no clear objective function." "Exactly," Mech said. "The simulation's AI is designed to adapt to tactical decisions, but human decisions don't follow any pattern the AI can predict. Every time it tried to adapt, the human," they gestured at Dante, "did something that contradicted the adaptation. The simulation got stuck in what we call a recursive paradox loop." Lumi pulsed thoughtfully. "The machine tried to predict chaos and became chaos." "That's actually a pretty good summary," Mix admitted. Nixvol was still processing this. "So, you're telling me that the simulation crashed because humans are—" "What? Illogical?" "Not illogical," Mix corrected. "Unpredictable. There's a difference. Illogical would mean no reasoning. This," they gestured at the spaghetti visualization, "this has reasoning. We just can't figure out what that reasoning is because it keeps changing based on variables that don't exist in any tactical manual." Dante raised his hand tentatively. "In my defense—" "You don't get a defense," Nixvol snapped. "You broke the most advanced training system in the galaxy." "But I also found a flaw in it," Dante countered, and immediately regretted it, because Nixvol's three eyes somehow managed to narrow even further. "What I mean is, if the simulation can't handle unpredictable tactics, what happens when you face enemies who are actually unpredictable? Pirates don't follow tactical manuals. Raiders don't optimize their approach. Real combat is messy." "Real combat," Nixvol said icily, "doesn't cost 12 billion credits in quantum neural architecture to repair." From the back of the crowd, a voice called out, "Is that what this costs?" "Rough estimate," Mix shouted back. "Could be more." A collective groan went through the assembled cadets. Sindra looked at Dante with something approaching awe. "You managed to break something worth more than some planetary economies." "It's a gift," Dante muttered. Nixvol opened his mouth to respond, probably with something involving expulsion, court-martial, and possibly launching Dante out an airlock, when another voice cut through the training deck. "Nobody is launching anyone out of any airlocks." The voice carried authority like a weapon. Every cadet in the room immediately stood at attention. Even Nixvol straightened, which was impressive considering he was already standing pretty straight. Admiral Dax walked into the training deck like he owned it, which technically he did, being the commanding officer of the entire Galactic Naval Academy. The Nexian was tall, even by Galactic standards, with bioluminescent patterns running across his dark skin that indicated rank, experience, and the kind of military career that became legend. He moved through the crowd of cadets, who parted like a particularly well-trained sea, until he stood directly in front of the disaster zone that was the simulation chamber. His eyes, two of them, standard configuration, but somehow more intense than most species 3 or 4, took in the scene. The dead simulation, the emergency lighting, the diagnostic displays showing catastrophic system failure. And finally, Dante, who was trying very hard to look like someone who definitely belonged in a prestigious military academy, and had not just caused an incident that would require committee meetings. "Admiral," Nixvol began, "I can explain." Dax held up one hand. Silence. He walked to the main control panel where Mix was still working and examined the diagnostic displays. He studied the decision tree visualization, the organized ones, and then the spaghetti bomb that represented human tactical thinking. For a long moment, he said nothing. Cadets exchanged nervous glances. Somewhere in the back, someone's breathing apparatus clicked anxiously. Finally, Admiral Dax turned to face Dante directly. "Cadet," he said, his voice measured, "in your professional opinion, did you complete the mission parameters?" Dante blinked. That was not the question he'd been expecting. Yes, Admiral. The colony was defended. The pirates were neutralized or driven off. And at any point did you violate direct orders or established rules of engagement? No, Admiral. Everything I did was technically within the simulation's parameters. Dax nodded slowly. Commander Nixvol, is this assessment accurate? Nixvol looked like he'd swallowed something bitter. Technically, yes, Admiral. Unconventional, but within parameters. And Chief Engineer Mix, is it accurate to say that the simulation crashed because it couldn't adapt to the cadet's tactical approach? Mix's 6 eyes blinked in sequence. Yes, Admiral. The simulation failed, not the cadet. Another long silence. Then Admiral Dax did something nobody expected. He smiled. Excellent, he said. Nixvol's 3 eyes went wide. Admiral? Commander, how many cycles have we been training cadets in the Infinity Nexus? 300, sir. And in 300 cycles, how many times has the simulation been fundamentally challenged? Never, sir. Until today. Dax turned back to Dante. Cadet, you didn't break the simulation. You exposed a critical design flaw. We've been training our officers to fight wars using predictable logic against enemies we assume will be equally predictable. That assumption could cost lives. He gestured at the chaos visualization still hovering in the holographic display. That, he said, pointing at the spaghetti bomb of human tactical thinking, is what real combat looks like. Messy, unpredictable, adaptive in ways that don't follow neat decision trees. Syndra raised one of her 4 hands. Admiral, are you saying you're not expelling him? Dax's smile widened slightly. Quite the opposite. Nixivol made a sound that might have been Centaurian for, "You've got to be kidding me." Effective immediately, Admiral Dax announced, we're creating a new division, Unconventional Tactics Research. Its purpose will be to stress test every system, every protocol, every simulation we have. Because if it can be broken in training, it needs to be fixed before real combat. He looked directly at Dante. And you, Cadet, are going to lead it. The training deck erupted in noise, shock, disbelief, and from somewhere in the back, what sounded suspiciously like laughter. Dante stood there, processing the fact that he'd apparently just gotten promoted for causing a disaster. Permission to speak, Admiral? Granted. I have absolutely no idea what I'm doing. Admiral Dax's smile became genuine. Cadet, that's exactly why you're perfect for the job. 3 days later, the Infinity Nexus was back online. Sort of. Define back online, Dante said, standing in front of the simulation chamber that had very nearly become his tomb, metaphorically speaking. Actual tombs didn't usually cost 12 billion credits. Chief Engineer Mix made a gesture with 4 of their appendages that translated roughly to, it turns on and probably won't explode. Their 6 eyes were bloodshot. Well, the Multarian equivalent, which looked more like dimmed bioluminescence, from what Dante assumed were 3 straight days of not sleeping. We've implemented what we're calling the Dante Protocol, Mix explained, pulling up a holographic interface. The simulation can now recognize and adapt to nonlinear tactical approaches. Theoretically. Theoretically, Dante repeated. We won't know for sure until someone tests it. They both looked at the neural link chair. You want me to get back in there, Dante said slowly. The Admiral wants you to get back in there. I want to go to sleep for approximately 100 hours. Dante couldn't really argue with that. He'd spent the last 3 days in meetings that tested the absolute limits of his attention span. Meetings about tactical theory, meetings about simulation architecture, meetings about the committee that would oversee the committee that would review the protocols for the new Unconventional Tactics Division. He'd also spent time with his new team, which currently consisted of exactly one person, Lumi. The Stellarian had volunteered immediately, pulsing with light patterns that indicated what Dante had learned to recognize as excitement. Working within predictable parameters is limiting, she'd explained. Your species thinks differently. I want to understand how. Brock had politely declined, citing that chaos gave him the Crustian equivalent of anxiety, which manifested as excessive molting. Syndra had laughed in Dante's face and said she'd rather eat her own secondary arms than join a division founded on breaking things. But she'd said it with enough amusement that Dante suspected she was secretly impressed, which, for a Balarian, was basically a declaration of friendship. Now, standing in front of the rebuilt simulation, Dante felt the weight of 300 cycles of military tradition pressing down on him. No pressure or anything. Right, he said, cracking his knuckles in a very human gesture that made Mix's species equivalent of eyebrows raise. Let's see if your Dante protocol works. Please don't break it again, Mix said, and it sounded less like a request and more like a prayer to whatever gods Multarians believed in. Dante sat down in the neural link chair. It still looked ominous. That apparently didn't change with software updates. The metallic tendrils extended, made contact with his temples, and neural link established. Initiating scenario. Please note, this simulation is operating under revised parameters. Unconventional approaches are now expected and monitored. That's either reassuring or terrifying, Dante muttered. Yes, agreed the synthetic voice, which seemed to have gained a sense of humor in the rebuild. That was probably not a good sign. Reality shifted. Dante found himself on a bridge again. Not the Defiant Hope this time, but a different vessel. The interface labeled it as the Resolute Dawn, which suggested someone in programming had a thing for optimistic ship names. Captain, the tactical officer said, we're receiving a distress signal from a research station. They're under attack by unknown hostiles. Estimated time to station, 8 minutes. Dante examined the holographic display. 1 research station, 6 hostile vessels. His ship, 1 frigate with moderate armaments. Standard scenario, predictable setup. Which meant the simulation was waiting to see what unpredictable thing he'd do. Helm, intercept course, maximum speed. Tactical, charge all weapons. Standard opening moves. He could feel the simulation watching, waiting. They arrived at the research station to find the hostile ships weren't pirates. They were automated defense drones, military grade, which explained why the civilian station was having problems. Hail the research station, Dante ordered. A scientist appeared on screen, looking appropriately panicked. Thank the founders. Those drones activated spontaneously. We can't shut them down remotely. They're cycling through security protocols we don't have access to. Dante studied the drone formations. They moved in perfect coordination, targeting the station's shields with mathematical precision. Can you identify their command frequency? He asked. We've tried. They're rotating frequencies to prevent jamming. Brock would have calculated the probability of success through 17 different approaches. Syndra would have charged in with overwhelming force, which wouldn't work because he was outgunned. Dante did neither. Do the drones have proximity sensors? He asked. Of course, military standard. And they're programmed not to damage each other, right? Yes, that's basic drone logic. Dante smiled. Helm, take us directly between the drone formation. Close as you can get without collision. His AI crew looked uncertain. Captain, that puts us in their crossfire. That's the idea. He maneuvered the Resolute Dawn into the middle of the drone formation. The automated vessels immediately stopped firing, their programming preventing them from hitting each other while targeting him. Now, Dante said, tactical. Fire on the station's shields. Minimal power. Sir? Do it! The frigate fired a low-power blast that barely registered on the station's shields. The drones, programmed to defend against any attack on the station, immediately recalculated. Their targeting switched from the station to Dante's ship, which was currently in the middle of their formation. The drones tried to fire. Their proximity sensors stopped them. Their programming created a cascade of contradictions. Defend the station, don't hit each other, eliminate the threat, maintain formation. 6 military-grade drones essentially froze in confusion. Research station, Dante said calmly. You now have approximately 30 seconds while their systems reboot. Use your override codes. But we don't have... You're a research station. Improvise. 28 seconds later, the scientist managed to inject a shutdown command through a maintenance frequency the drones hadn't locked down because nobody expected anyone to use a frequency meant for scheduling routine maintenance. All 6 drones powered down. Mission complete. Outside the simulation, in the observation deck, a crowd had gathered. Word had spread that the human was testing the rebuilt Infinity Nexus. Commander Nixavol stood at the front, his 3 eyes fixed on the tactical display. He did it again, Syndra said, and she sounded almost disappointed that she wasn't more disappointed. Probability of that approach succeeding should have been negligible, Brock calculated. And yet, Lumi pulsed. Admiral Dax, watching from the command level, nodded slowly. Unconventional, but effective. The simulation adapted correctly. Mix let out a breath they'd been holding for approximately 6 minutes. The Dante protocol is working. The system recognized his approach, adapted without crashing, and that's when every alarm in the training deck started blaring again. No, Mix whispered. No, no, no. Inside the simulation, Dante had been about to disconnect when a new alert appeared. Captain, sensors are detecting anomalous readings from the disabled drones. They're attempting to reactivate using a backup protocol we didn't account for. Dante stared at the display. That's not part of the scenario. Correct. This is an adaptive challenge generated by the simulation's new parameters, which meant the Infinity Nexus, learning from Dante's approach, had decided to throw him an unexpected curveball. The drones began powering back up, but their programming was corrupted from the forced shutdown. They weren't moving in coordinated patterns anymore. They were moving erratically, unpredictably. They were moving like humans thought. Oh, Dante said. Oh, that's just fantastic. He had approximately 45 seconds before 6 confused, corrupted, heavily armed military drones decided that everything was a threat. Outside, Mix was frantically working the control panel. The simulation is functioning as designed, but the adaptive AI is generating challenges faster than predicted. It's learning from his tactics and using them against him. Nixivol's expression shifted from concern to something approaching horrified realization. You built a simulation that thinks like a human? We built a simulation that can adapt to humans. Apparently, there's a difference. Inside, Dante made a decision. If the simulation wanted to play unpredictable, he'd give it predictable. Helm, full stop, drop shields. Power down weapons. Captain, that's surrender protocol. Broadcast on all frequencies. The resolute dawn went dark, broadcasting surrender to 6 corrupted drones that were now behaving with all the tactical logic of caffeinated squirrels. The drones, their corrupted programming, trying to process a surrender from a vessel that had just been hostile, froze again. Then their systems crashed entirely from the contradiction. Mission actually complete this time. Dante disconnected from the neural link, gasping. Outside, the alarms were still blaring. "Why are the alarms still going?" Dante called out. Mix was staring at their diagnostic display. "Because the simulation just generated 16 new adaptive scenarios based on your last 2 approaches. It's creating an entire library of unconventional tactics to test future cadets with." Admiral Dax was smiling. "Outstanding." Commander Nixvol looked at Dante, then at the simulation, then back at Dante. "You broke it again." "No," Admiral Dax corrected. "He improved it. Now the simulation can train cadets for real combat. Messy, unpredictable, adaptive combat." Mix pulled up a holographic display showing the new tactical scenarios the simulation had generated. They were beautiful in their chaos, perfect in their imperfection. "How long until it's ready for other cadets?" Dax asked. "We'll need to run stability tests, verify the adaptive parameters, ensure the quantum matrices can handle the increased processing load." Mix calculated. 2 weeks, maybe 3. "Excellent. Cadet Dante, you have 3 weeks to break it as many times as possible. Find every flaw. Expose every weakness." Dante nodded slowly. "So my job is officially to break things." "Your job," Dax corrected, "is to make sure nothing else breaks when it matters." As the Admiral walked away, Syndra approached Dante with 2 of her 4 arms crossed. "You know what the worst part is?" "What?" "You're actually good at this. It's infuriating." Lumi pulsed with light. "I believe the human expression is, if it's stupid, but it works, it's not stupid." "No," Syndra countered, "it's still stupid. It just happens to also work." Brock clicked thoughtfully. "I'm going to need to completely revise my probability calculations for human tactical behavior." "Good luck with that," Dante said. 3 weeks later, the Infinity Nexus crashed again, and again, and again. Each time, Mix and their team rebuilt it stronger. Each time, Dante found a new way to break it. By the end of the month, the simulation had become something unprecedented. A training system that didn't just teach tactics, it taught adaptation. Commander Nixvol, watching the rebuilt simulation run flawlessly through its 10th consecutive stress test, finally allowed himself a small smile. "You know," he said to Admiral Dax, "I'm starting to think letting humans into the Academy wasn't the worst decision we've ever made." "Only starting to think?" Dax replied. "Let's not get carried away. He still costs us billions in repairs." Inside the simulation chamber, Dante was running his latest test. This time, he was teaching Lumi his approach. The Stellarian was learning fast, her thought patterns adapting, becoming more fluid. "So the key," Dante explained, "is to think less about what you're supposed to do, and more about what nobody expects you to do." "That seems counterintuitive." "Exactly." Lumi pulsed with understanding. "Humans are strange." "Yeah," Dante agreed. "We really are." And somewhere in the quantum neural architecture of the Infinity Nexus, in the code that had learned to adapt and evolve, a simple truth had been written into the foundation of galactic military training. Sometimes the best way to solve a problem is to be the kind of problem nobody prepared for.